I gave birth on a freezing winter afternoon in the suburbs of Chicago, after 18 hours of exhausting labor so intense I could no longer feel the contractions. My body felt like it was being crushed from the inside out, and my mind clung to only one thought. My daughter was about to be born. Outside, snow blanketed everything, while inside the delivery room only a shattered yellow light flickered from the ceiling, and the sound of my own hoarse breathing filled the air. I had imagined that after all the pain, the moment my daughter let out her first cry would be the most beautiful moment of my life. I had imagined my husband, Daniel, would hold my hand, look at our child, and smile like we had dreamed about, but I was wrong. So terribly wrong. When the nurse placed the red-faced baby in my arms, I hadn't even held her tightly yet, when Daniel stepped forward and snatched a stack of papers from the nurse's hands. The nurse, an older woman with deep-set eyes and a cold face, flinched and stepped back. Daniel didn't look at me, didn't ask for my opinion, just bowed his head, picked up a pen, and began writing. "Her name will be Evelyn, after my mother," he said, his tone indifferent, as if he were giving orders to an employee, not speaking to the woman who had just given birth to his child. I struggled to sit up, my heart pounding like it was about to break free from my chest. "We agreed, remember? Her name is Lena, Daniel. Did you forget?" He turned to me, his eyes cold as steel. "You don't get to decide," Daniel said, enunciating each word. "She's my child, and my mother picked that name before you even knew you were pregnant." I was nearly paralyzed. The pain from childbirth still throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the feeling of betrayal from my own husband. I gently squeezed my daughter's tiny hand, the baby still sleeping peacefully, unaware of how cruel the world could be. The older nurse, the only other person in the room besides Daniel and me, stepped closer. She leaned in and whispered something that made it hard for me to breathe. "Do you want me to tell him the truth?" I turned to her, eyes wide. "What truth?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. But the nurse only shook her head slightly and glanced at Daniel, who was still hunched over writing, completely unaware that the atmosphere in the room had drastically changed. "Not now. But you should know. This isn't as simple as you think," she said quickly, her voice low and firm like a rock. I felt like my heart dropped into a pit. The name Evelyn on the paper, Daniel's icy expression, the nurse's knowing look, all of it stirred up a nameless dread inside me. I stammered, "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" The nurse gently squeezed my hand, as if to calm me. "Trust me. Don't let him take control of everything. You need to know the truth before it's too late." Daniel looked up, slightly frowning. "What are you two whispering about?" I pressed my lips together, trying to stay calm. "I don't agree with that name. We chose it together. I don't give you permission to change it." He let out a short laugh. "Don't give permission?" Daniel set the pen down, stepped right up to me, and looked down like I was ruining some grand ceremony of his. "Jessica, you just gave birth. You're tired, you're not thinking clearly. It's best if you don't make a fuss. I'll handle everything." I looked at him, part of me wanting to scream, to rip apart all the layers of fake calm he wore. But I didn't even know exactly what I was up against. I only knew one thing. Something was very wrong, and I couldn't let it go on. I turned to the nurse. "I need to know. Now." She nodded, her eyes serious. "All right, but you have to be prepared. Because once you know, there's no going back." I held my daughter tighter. Despite the fear, I gave a slight nod. "Tell me." Back when I was 26, I met Daniel after just landing a job as assistant to the director at a small tech company in St. Paul, Minnesota. Daniel was a software engineer, calm, smart, and with a polished look that didn't go unnoticed by others in the company. We met during a team meeting when he accidentally picked up my laptop. After a few hallway and cafeteria chats, Daniel asked me out for coffee. We dated for over a year before he proposed. I still remember the moment he knelt down in a garden of blazing red maple trees on a crisp autumn day, offering me a small but delicate ring. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Until I met Patricia, his mother. Patricia was over 60, dressed elegantly, always wearing classic pearl necklaces and never seen without her bold red lipstick. She didn't yell at me or say anything outright rude. Patricia hurt with suffocating politeness, as if every word was carefully chosen to make me feel small and unworthy. At our first meeting, she looked me up and down with a distant expression and asked, "You went to a state university? I thought Daniel would choose someone from the Ivy League." I gave a stiff smile, but before I could respond, she turned to Daniel, as if I didn't exist. "Well, I suppose my son's taste is a bit more modest than I expected." Daniel just laughed it off and said nothing. I thought it was just a joke. But as time went on, I realized it wasn't. When we started planning the wedding, Patricia suggested changing the main color from blue to cream because blue makes you look washed out. She complained about the venue being not upscale enough and even asked if I could lose a few pounds to look better in the dress. I tried to be patient for Daniel's sake. He always said, "My mom is strict, but she means well." I believed him. I wanted to believe that once she got to know me, things would change. But that never happened. When I got pregnant, everything escalated. Patricia seemed to think that me carrying her grandchild gave her the right to control every aspect of my life. "Jessica, you really shouldn't eat cheese like that. It'll affect the baby's intelligence." "Which hospital are you planning to deliver at?" "The one where Daniel was born is the best." "I've already checked." "Don't listen to the doctors, they just say things to sound smart." When I was pregnant with Daniel, I only ate potatoes and eggs, and still gave birth to a perfect baby. I tried to explain that I had my own doctor and a clear healthcare plan, but each time, Daniel would sigh and brush it off. "Don't stress, she just cares about you and the baby." But I knew. She didn't care about me. She just wanted to control everything, even the baby who hadn't been born yet. I remember once she took me shopping for baby clothes but then picked out everything herself, all pink, all printed with the name Evelyn, her name. When I gently reminded her that we hadn't decided on a name yet, she just smiled. "No need to discuss it. That name is a legacy. I already talked to Daniel." I was stunned. Daniel had never mentioned that. When I asked him about it that night, he just said, "Yeah, she brought it up, but I figured, come on, it makes her happy. What's the harm?" That's when I started to feel afraid. Not of Patricia, but of Daniel. Afraid of his silence, his constant willingness to give in, making me feel like a stranger in my own life. I used to believe that being a daughter-in-law meant learning how to compromise, but I didn't think it meant giving up my own voice or sacrificing my daughter's identity just to please my mother-in-law. Now, sitting on the hospital bed with my baby in my arms, I recalled it all like a slow-motion film. All the times I stayed quiet, all the times I gave in. It all led to the moment Daniel signed Evelyn on the birth certificate without even asking me. And now, when the nurse whispered, "Do you want me to tell him the truth?" I knew this wasn't just about naming a child. This was a truth I wasn't ready to face, but one I could no longer avoid. I looked at her. Her eyes seemed to see through something, and I gave a small nod. I got pregnant one chilly March morning in Minnesota when the wind slipped through the windows like a reminder that life was about to turn a new page. 2 red lines appeared on the test and my heart raced. I was both overjoyed and terrified. Happy because this was our first child. Terrified because I knew his mother wouldn't leave us in peace. Just 3 days after we shared the news, Patricia called at 7 in the morning while I was still in bed, aching after a sleepless night. She didn't ask how I felt, didn't congratulate me. Instead, her voice was clear and commanding. "Jessica, I've sent you a list of foods to avoid, a reliable nutritionist, and the best hospital in the area. Don't follow nonsense from the internet. I know what's best for the baby." Before I could respond, she hung up. I told Daniel, hoping he'd understand how I felt, being pregnant for the first time, needing support more than control, but he just shrugged. "That's just how my mom is, you know that. She's only trying to help." I didn't know how to respond. help? How is it help when I wasn't allowed to decide anything for myself? From then on, Patricia sent weekly emails, sometimes 10 pages long, filled with detailed notes about diet, ultrasound schedules, even playlists of classical music, to develop the baby's brain. She even bought a music player and sent it to our house, insisting I play it for 2 hours a day. I chose an OBGYN at a private clinic I trusted, someone who had cared for me even before I got married. But when Patricia found out, she was furious. She wanted me to go to St. Briar Hospital, where she volunteered and where Daniel was born. I've already made an appointment for you, next Friday. Don't embarrass me. When I pushed back and said I wanted to stick with my doctor because I felt safe, Daniel looked at me like I was causing trouble. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a hospital. I started to feel lost in my own life. Every morning, I woke up to a long list of shoulds and should-nots dictated by Patricia. Meals had to be precise in portion and timing. Every evening, I had to send her my meal plan. One time, I had pancakes with syrup, and she called in the middle of the night to scold me. Jessica? Sugar will slow the baby's brain development. Do you want it to fall behind its peers? Daniel sat beside me, and instead of standing up for me, he blamed me. You're stressing my mom out. Don't make her worry so much. I broke down in tears. Not over pancakes, but from the helplessness that was slowly eating away at my heart. By the second trimester, I had severe morning sickness. I felt exhausted, my taste changed, and I couldn't stand the smell of the food Patricia sent. I tried to eat more gently, adjusting to what my body could handle. That's when Patricia accused me of ruining the baby's future. She started coming over every weekend, bringing baskets of food, a blood pressure monitor, and charts tracking fetal development. Once, I woke up to find her rummaging through our kitchen, throwing out anything that didn't meet her standards. Daniel stood there with a coffee mug, saying nothing. I nearly shouted, "This is my home. How can you let your mom do this?" He just sighed and set his mug down. I'm tired of all this drama, Jessica. Do you want everything to be a mess? Drama? When I was carrying a tiny life inside me, living by someone else's rules, without even basic support from the man I married, I started journaling just to hold on to a piece of myself, because I was scared that someday I wouldn't recognize who I was anymore. The breaking point came when Patricia brought over a leather-bound notebook with a list of names she had already picked out, all starting with E, with Evelyn written in bold at the top. This is a family tradition. I've already decided. Daniel agrees, right, son? I looked at Daniel, hoping he'd shake his head, but he stayed silent, then gave a small nod. I don't know how I held myself back from screaming right then. I just got up, held my belly, walked to the bedroom, and closed the door. For the first time, I realized that the child growing inside me wasn't just mine. It was being treated like a piece of legacy. Patricia wanted to mold in her own image, and Daniel was no longer my partner. I just didn't know yet. Things were only beginning to fall apart. I was admitted to the hospital on a gloomy morning in early October, when golden leaves had begun to fall across the porch and the wind carried a chill that signaled winter was near. Labor started at 3 a.m, gentle at first, like a soft squeeze, then quickly turned into violent contractions that left me unable to stand. Daniel drove me to the hospital, but didn't say a word the entire ride. He was on the phone the whole time. Of course, with his mother, I remember his voice clearly, steady and unhurried. Mom, we're on our way. No, I've got the hospital bag. Yes, your name is already on the list, just like you said. His mother's name? At that moment, I was in too much pain to think straight. But deep down, a gnawing sense of unease began to rise. While I lay on the hospital bed, my back drenched in sweat, Daniel sat in a chair, eyes glued to his phone screen. He scrolled through the news, texted, and occasionally chuckled at someone on the other end. He didn't hold my hand once, didn't ask if I was okay. Even the nurse frowned and gave him sideways glances. I screamed through a contraction, my whole body trembling from the pain, and all he said was, "Don't be so loud. You're making everyone tense." When the baby let out her first cry, I thought I would burst into tears from emotion, but instead I felt a cold emptiness. I hadn't even held her for a full minute before Daniel stepped up, brushed my hand aside, and snatched the birth certificate papers from the nurse as if he were the only one with any right. "She'll be named after my mother." "Evelyn Jane," Daniel said, without even looking at me. I was confused. We agreed on another name. Lena Grace. We both agreed, don't you remember? He looked at me like I was a stranger. "I didn't forget. I changed my mind, and you don't have the right to object." I was stunned. After 18 hours of labor, my body drained, my mind a mess, and now the man I'd shared my life with was trying to erase my voice completely. The nurse standing nearby, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes, suddenly leaned in and whispered, soft as wind brushing my ear, "Do you want me to tell him the truth?" I turned to her, trying to steady myself. "What truth?" I whispered, my breath short and uneven. She looked at Daniel, then back at me, her eyes filled with determination. "Not yet. But you need to know. And you need to know now." I nodded. I didn't know what I was facing, but I could feel it was something big. I looked at Daniel. "You don't have the right to change her name without me." He chuckled. "I already did. And if you don't want to make this harder, it's best to stay quiet." I gripped the blanket tightly, trying to stay calm, but the nurse didn't stay silent. She stepped forward and firmly pulled the papers from Daniel's hands. "You don't get to treat her like this," she said, her voice cold as steel. "And if you think I don't know what you did with the insurance paperwork, you're mistaken." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" I looked up at the nurse. "Insurance paperwork? What's going on?" She sighed. "I checked when you were admitted. You're not listed on the parental insurance file. Only one parent is listed as legal guardian, and that's Daniel. You're not legally recognized as the mother." I went numb. My blood felt like it stopped flowing. "That can't be. I'm her biological mother." Daniel turned away, fists clenched. "You don't understand." "Then explain," I said, my voice trembling. "What did you do?" Daniel took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I just arranged things to be safe. I needed to make sure that if anything happened, custody would go to someone responsible." "You're saying I'm not responsible enough for my own child. You wouldn't even listen to my mother." That's when it hit me. Everything. From the name Evelyn, to the diet, the hospital, and now the legal documents, were all pieces of a plan that Daniel and his mother had carefully laid out. A plan to push me out of my own child's life. The nurse stood tall, arms crossed. "She has the right to know. And I'll make sure the records are corrected. Today." Daniel stepped back, his expression shifting from anger to worry. I held my baby tighter, tears streaming down, not from pain, but from betrayal. I didn't know exactly what awaited me beyond that hospital door. But I knew one thing. I would not stay silent another second. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a hospital room, holding my newborn daughter, questioning whether the man I'd shared 3 years of marriage with was plotting to take away my right to be a mother. The nurse, Carol, still stood there, her expression firm like someone who had witnessed too many broken families through the lens of her scrubs. She placed a hand on my shoulder, light but steady. "We need to review all your records, Jessica, and I'll personally speak with the administration." Daniel stood frozen, his shoulders trembling slightly, eyes darting between me and Carol. He no longer looked composed, no longer in control. I saw the fear in his eyes, and it sent a chill through me. "What did you do?" I asked again, this time with a voice no longer shaking but steady and firm. "Why isn't my name on the paperwork? Why did you list yourself as the sole legal parent?" Daniel turned away, avoiding my gaze. "You don't understand, Jessica. I did what I had to do to protect the baby." I laughed, an empty, hollow laugh. Protect her? By erasing her mother from the records? You think that's the right thing to do? Daniel clenched his fists. My mom said, if you ever left, if you changed your mind, then I wouldn't have any rights to her. She was just being cautious. I could barely believe what I was hearing. So your mother told you to deceive me? So you'd have full custody if I ever walked away? He didn't answer, but the way he looked down said everything. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, gripping the blanket around me. I knew Patricia didn't like me. I knew she always wanted control, but I never imagined she'd orchestrate a legal plan to push me out of my own family. And Daniel, the man I loved, the man I trusted, went along with it. Carol, I turned to the nurse. I want to speak to someone from administration immediately. I want copies of all insurance registration, custody documents, and every form Daniel signed on my behalf. We'll do it right away. She nodded, then turned to Daniel, her voice steely. And I suggest you don't try anything reckless, because everything is being documented from this moment on. I reached for my phone, but Daniel was faster. He grabbed it from the table beside me. Jessica, you're overreacting. You're not thinking clearly. You just gave birth. You need to rest. I looked at him, calmer than I'd ever been. Give me back my phone, Daniel. No, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk in private. Without outsiders. There's nothing left to say in private, I replied, turning to Carol. I need to call my sister. She's the only family I have nearby. She nodded. I'll borrow the duty nurse's phone. She walked out, leaving Daniel and me in a silence so heavy it was suffocating. Daniel tried to move closer, but I pulled back. You planned this with your mother. You meant to deceive me, Daniel. How do you expect me to ever trust you again? I didn't want to lose the baby, he nearly shouted, then quickly reined himself in, realizing he'd just given everything away. I looked up at him, feeling both heartbroken and clear-eyed. You weren't afraid of losing your child. You were afraid of losing control. And you were more afraid of losing your mother than losing your wife. Right then, the door swung open. Carol walked in with a younger woman wearing a badge that read Admin Supervisor, Nicole. In their hands was a thick stack of documents. Nicole placed them on the table, opened the folder, and flipped through the pages. Per Miss Jessica's request, here is the complete documentation related to insurance and parental registration. She stopped at one page and pointed to a bolded line. Legal guardian, Daniel Weston. I could barely breathe. Nicole looked at me with sympathetic eyes. Since this is a special circumstance and you're physically present, you have every legal right to amend the records. But I'll need identity verification and your written consent. I'll do it right now, I said without a second of hesitation. And I want every change documented and signed by a witness. Daniel stepped back, his face pale. Jessica, please. This isn't what my mom meant to do to hurt you. She was just thinking about the future. It wasn't her. It was you. You're the one who signed. You're the one who erased me from being a mother. I stood up, legs still shaky from giving birth, but my voice steady as stone. I won't let this happen again. Not to me, not to my daughter. And when Carol returned with the phone, I didn't hesitate to dial. My sister, Chloe. Danielle was less than 20 minutes away from the hospital. I held the phone to my ear, my voice strangely calm. Chloe, I need you. Come to the hospital right now. It's urgent. Less than 20 minutes after the call, Chloe, my sister, burst into the hospital room, her face full of worry. As soon as she saw me, she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around my shoulders, like she was afraid I might collapse at any moment. What's going on? You sounded terrified, Chloe asked, her eyes quickly scanning from Daniel to Carol, who was standing near the bed with a guarded expression. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I handed Chloe the file Nicole had just given me, a copy of all the insurance and guardianship documents. She flipped through a few pages, her initial confusion quickly turning into fury. He removed you from the documents? You just gave birth and he dared to do this? Daniel stood near the door, arms crossed, his voice low but tense. I don't need outsiders interfering in my family's business. Chloe turned on him. Your family? This baby is my niece, and the person you're trying to push out of her life is my sister. Don't kid yourself. I looked at Daniel. I wanted to believe this was just a legal mistake, a careless arrangement. But the strange calm in his demeanor, the silence every time I asked questions, it all pointed to something much darker. Chloe stepped toward the table where Daniel had placed my phone after snatching it earlier. Next to it, his own phone was lit up, an incoming message. Whether out of instinct or suspicion, Chloe picked it up. He didn't lock it, she muttered, then glanced at me. Do you want to see who he was texting while you were giving birth? I hesitated. Chloe. But she had already opened the messages. Within seconds, her face froze. Her eyes widened, her fingers tightened around the phone. You have to see this. I took the phone, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped it. On the screen was a conversation between Daniel and someone named Madeline. No last name, but the profile picture showed a blonde woman with a polished smile. She looked vaguely familiar. I scrolled down. The most recent message read, "Just waiting for you. She'll have nothing once the baby is born. You and your mom took care of everything." My mind went blank, my vision blurred, but I could still read every word below it. I can't believe you're finally free of her. Soon, we'll be a real family. Chloe's voice was cold and sharp. You remember Madeline, right? Karen's daughter. Your mother-in-law's best friend? The one Patricia always said was beautiful, well-mannered, and more worthy of Daniel than anyone else? I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The pieces started falling into place. Perfectly, terrifyingly. Patricia had never liked me. She'd always tried to push me out of Daniel's life, but I never imagined she'd go so far as to find a replacement. And Daniel, the man I trusted most, willingly played the leading role in this cruel scheme. You were seeing her? I asked, my voice almost unrecognizable. Daniel didn't answer, but he didn't need to. His silence said more than any excuse ever could. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, trying to shield against the harsh truth closing in on me. You were going to take everything from me? I whispered. My child, my right to be her mother, the life I built. Daniel leaned toward me, his voice tense. Jessica, you don't understand. You've always been too emotional, too sensitive. You were never the kind of woman my mother hoped for. Worthy? I laughed bitterly. So your solution was to betray me? And secretly prepare to leave me with nothing? Daniel clenched his fists, staring at the floor. My mom said, if you ever walked away from the family, you'd drag me down with you. She said Madeline would help me go further. She believes Madeline is a better investment. Chloe slammed the phone onto the table, her voice shaking with rage. So, family is just an investment to you? And Jessica, the woman who stood by you when you had nothing, is just a liability? I looked down at my daughter, still peacefully sleeping in my arms. My mind swirled with pain, anger, betrayal. But beneath it all was a flicker of something stronger. Resolve. I turned to Chloe. Do you still have contact with Ethan, our cousin, the lawyer? Chloe nodded. Of course. I'll call him right now. And Jess, you're not alone in this. I held my daughter tightly, then looked Daniel straight in the eye. You just lost everything, Daniel. And this time, I'm the one rewriting the rules. I was still holding my daughter in my arms as Chloe dialed Ethan, our cousin, now a family law attorney in Minneapolis. Each ring echoed like a pounding heartbeat in my chest. I couldn't believe I had once seen Daniel as my rock. The man standing in front of me now wasn't a husband. He was a stranger who had quietly laid out an entire chessboard to cut me out of my own family. As soon as Ethan answered, Chloe didn't waste a second. Ethan, it's Chloe. Jessica just gave birth, but her husband is trying to take full custody of the baby. We have documents and witnesses at the hospital. We need to act now. Ethan asked only one question. How long is she staying in the hospital? At least 2 more days, Chloe replied. Keep every document. Don't sign anything else. I'll be there in under an hour. I nodded at Chloe, but my eyes stayed locked on Daniel. He was leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, trying to look calm, but his right foot twitched, a telltale habit when he was nervous. He knew things were out of his control. I looked back at the table. The birth certificate still lay there, stamped with Evelyn Jane Weston. The name Patricia had chosen herself, carried out by Daniel like an obedient child awaiting his mother's command. I didn't need to think twice. Cradling my daughter with one arm, I reached out with the other, grabbed the paper, and coldly tore it in half, then again into quarters. Daniel flinched. Jessica? What are you doing? Taking back my right to be a mother, I said, not blinking. You won't control me, and you definitely won't control her. The sound of tearing paper cut through the heavy air like a blade, severing the last thread of what I had once naively called family. The door swung open, and, like a scene from a script I'd seen too many times, Patricia walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the polished tile floor. She wore a cream fur coat, flawless red lipstick, and swept the room with her eyes like she was the one who'd just given birth. My body tensed instinctively. Chloe stepped closer to shield the bed, but I raised a hand to stop her. Patricia approached the foot of the bed, her gaze landing on the shredded birth certificate on the floor. She gave a half smile. I take it you've figured everything out. You knew I gave birth today, but didn't bother to ask me a single question, I said, my voice low. You only cared whether your name was printed on the birth certificate. Patricia crossed her arms. Yes, because it's what's best for the child, a name with value, history, and protection. She glanced at Daniel. As I said, you needed to stick to the plan. Daniel swallowed hard, his lips tight. The confidence he once had was gone. There were no more excuses left. I sat up straighter, holding my baby closer. So, what's your plan, Patricia? Take custody, bring her to live with you and Madeline? And me, her biological mother? Just erased from her life like I never existed? She didn't deny it. She didn't even look away. You're not the kind of woman fit to raise a child in the Weston family. Too emotional, too indecisive, lacking direction. Madeline and her mother will provide a more stable environment. I could hardly believe I was hearing those words from a woman who was educated, once a respected high school principal. And that gives you the right to override my right to be a mother? I said through clenched teeth. Patricia smirked. You only thought you had rights. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes burning. If you think you can use your influence to take custody of my niece, then you'd better prepare for a very long legal battle. And you'll lose. I looked directly at Daniel, without a trace of pity. You can keep following your mother, or you can step out of her shadow and do the right thing. But remember this. I have evidence, witnesses, and a lawyer, and I'm ready to take this to court. Daniel stepped back half a pace. His eyes flicked to Patricia, as if searching for an answer, but she said nothing. The certainty in her gaze had turned into a glossy shell, starting to crack. I bent down and kissed my daughter's forehead. You'll grow up in a world where your mother never bows to injustice, no matter who stands in the way. Daniel stood frozen, fists clenched at his sides, eyes clouded like someone waking up from a long, bitter dream. I stared at him without blinking, waiting for a reaction. Anger, defiance, resistance like before? But this time, nothing came. Just silence, stretching on like a held breath. Then he exhaled, like all the air had been drained from his chest. His shoulders dropped, the hardness fading from his face. I can't do this, Daniel said, his voice low like a confession. Patricia immediately turned to him, her sharp eyes flashing with shock and fury. What did you say? She took a step toward him, her tone sharp. Do you have any idea how long we've prepared for this? How many years I endured to get you here, and now you say you can't? Daniel still didn't look at her. His eyes were on me and the baby. For the first time since she was born, his gaze didn't feel distant. Something had changed. Maybe it was too late, but it was real. "You're not the one who lives with her," Daniel said, his voice steady but weary. "I do, and I don't want to live like this anymore." "I gave up my youth for you," Patricia nearly screamed. "And now you think you can stand here and throw it all away over some foolish emotion?" Chloe raised an eyebrow. "That foolish emotion you're talking about is my sister's right to be a mother." Patricia glared at her, then turned back to Daniel, as if willing him to return to her carefully crafted path. But this time, he didn't move. He bowed his head, exhaled, and said softly, "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't keep doing what my conscience won't allow." That was the moment I knew the game was over. Not because Daniel had suddenly become brave, but because he finally let go of the strings his mother had pulled for so long. His silence today wasn't avoidance. It was refusal. Patricia stood there for a few more seconds, her expression flickering between wounded pride and anger. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out of the room without another word. The sound of her heels on the tile floor echoed like the collapse of a crumbling empire. Daniel didn't follow her. The air in the room felt lighter, though still tense like a drawn string. Carol stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We need to fix the paperwork today, before there's any further interference from Daniel's family." Nicole, the admin supervisor, returned with a fresh set of documents. "I've prepared a new guardianship registration. Once you sign here, Ms. Jessica, we'll update the legal records, naming you as the sole legal guardian unless a court decides otherwise." I didn't hesitate. I took the pen. My hand trembled slightly, but my heart didn't. I signed each letter carefully, as if laying the foundation of my life all over again. This time, I wasn't being led by anyone. When I set the pen down, Nicole nodded. "The records will be updated today, and all previous changes, including your husband's unilateral filing, will be voided." Chloe turned to me, gripping my hand. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Daniel remained still, as if trying to come to terms with the consequences of his own actions. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Maybe he wanted to apologize, maybe he was just looking for a quiet way to back out. I didn't care. I lifted my daughter higher, gazing into her tiny, barely opened eyes. "No one will ever make decisions for you again," I whispered. "From now on, you'll live the life you deserve. Free, loved, and respected." The door closed softly behind us, but I knew that from this day forward, every old door had slammed shut. Ethan arrived about an hour later and immediately began working with the hospital's legal department to file a comprehensive signed and witnessed report. We had everything: proof of Daniel's falsification, messages with Madeline, Carol's testimony, a copy of the altered birth certificate, and now the new legally binding documents. There was nothing left to lose, and nothing left to fear. That day, I didn't just give birth to my daughter. I gave birth to a new version of myself. A mother who knows her worth, and a woman who will never let anyone take that away again. I left the hospital on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the Minnesota sky thick with clouds, a soft breeze rustling the bare tree branches like the whole world was shedding its old skin. I carried my daughter, little Lena, wrapped snugly in a beige fleece blanket, her tiny face nestled against my chest, her breathing steady like a gentle lullaby. Daniel didn't come with us. He didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note or send a message. When I looked back one last time, the hospital room was empty, like everything that had happened in it was just a long, heavy dream. But my daughter was the living proof that I had made it through, and wasn't looking back. Chloe drove us home in her SUV. She had the car seat ready, the heat turned on, and a bag packed for both of us, like the big sister I knew I could count on. As the car pulled away from the hospital gates, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting go of the last traces of the prison I had once called my husband's family. 3 days later, Patricia called. First, there were missed calls, then texts. The first few were gentle. "The baby needs her paternal family." Then came the veiled threats. You should remember who raised Daniel to be successful. And finally, outright blame. You're destroying a child's future out of selfishness. I didn't answer any of them. I changed my number, blocked emails and social media. I left no cracks for Patricia to slip into the new world I was building for Lena. A world without manipulation, control, or deceit. As for Daniel, after the case fell into Ethan's hands, he went silent. I heard that a few weeks after I left the hospital, he tried to salvage things with Madeline, the secret lover during my pregnancy. But she quickly walked away when she realized Daniel no longer had status or influence. His job at the software firm was suspended after internal reports about the insurance fraud surfaced. Within a month, Daniel had lost almost everything: his job, his affair, and even his mother's support once she saw it all fall apart. I was different. I didn't lose anything. I reclaimed what was mine. I filed for divorce just 1 week after returning home. Ethan handled all the paperwork personally. Daniel didn't contest it, didn't show up at the first mediation. He probably knew that everything he did in that hospital had been documented, witnessed, and recorded. The more silent he stayed, the more he avoided an even bigger lawsuit. Life after that wasn't easy. I had many sleepless nights with Lena crying, mornings when my eyes were swollen from exhaustion. But in every tiny hug, every soft breath as she napped on my chest, I felt a peace I had never known before. I returned to part-time work from home, taking small freelance projects in financial analysis, my field of study. Chloe helped care for Lena on weekends, and Ethan provided legal support whenever I needed it. I wasn't alone. And most importantly, I was no longer under anyone's control. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't need Daniel or Patricia to pay for what they'd done. The truth was, they brought that ending upon themselves, with poor choices, by valuing power and pride over love. I didn't win with cruelty. I won by protecting my daughter from a future controlled by people who didn't deserve her. And above all, I reclaimed freedom, for her and for myself. One early spring morning, I took Lena to the park near our home. Soft sunlight fell across her fine hair, and her eyes opened wide, seeing the world for the first time with a pure, untainted gaze. I sat down on a wooden bench, held her close to my chest, and whispered, "This is where we begin again, Lena. Just us. And I promise, no one will ever take you from me again." She didn't respond, of course, but I saw her smile as if she understood everything, and I smiled too, light as the breeze. Not because I'd forgotten what had happened, but because I had moved beyond it. Through my own story, I realized not everyone who carries the title family stands for protection and love. Some use it as a weapon to control, to violate freedom and dignity. But when you dare to stand up, to defend your voice and your right to be a mother, you don't just save yourself, you give your child a future free from manipulation. Sometimes, freedom begins with the courage to say, enough. What do you think about Jessica's story and the choice she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional stories and powerful life lessons about family. My name is Sophia. I'm 32 years old and an art teacher at a high school in Oregon. All my life, I've believed that family is irreplaceable. Especially the bond I shared with my grandmother, the woman who taught me how to brew mint tea, embroider handkerchiefs, and cherish the sparkle of sunlight through glass windows. But that belief shattered just 1 week after she passed away. My grandmother Eleanor lived in an old farmhouse from the early 20th century, with a wide porch and a garden full of fragrant lavender. She used to say, "This house will be yours, Sophia, because you're the only one who sees it with your heart." Her words felt like a whisper in the evening breeze, as I stood hesitating on the worn steps, still clutching the express-delivered envelope from the lawyer's office. The lawyer had just finished reading the will. In it, my grandmother had clearly left the house to me. But before I could even react, my mother, Carol, casually reached for the set of keys on the table, as if it was her given right. "I know you're emotional, but let's be realistic, Sophia," she said in a voice as sweet as syrup but cold as ice. "This house needs too many repairs. Your father and I just want to spare you the burden." I looked at her, then at my father, Walter, who simply lowered his head, avoiding my eyes, his hands nervously clasped together. They were talking about my grandmother's house, the place I grew up in every summer, like it was just another convenient item to be boxed away. "I don't need to be protected," I said, my voice trembling. "Grandma left me this house. It's in the will. I have the right." A scoff came from the corner of the room. My brother Brandon leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, not even trying to hide his mocking smile. "Soph, do you even know how high the property taxes are here? With your teacher's salary, holding onto this house is just a fantasy." The scent of lavender still lingered faintly in the air. Less than a month ago, Grandma and I were sipping tea in the back room, and she was telling me about her first love with a gentle smile. And now, I was watching my family tear apart her memory like it was a pile of clearance sale leftovers. "You can't do this," I blurted out, my voice nearly choking. "Actually," my sister Vanessa cut in, face void of any remorse, "Mom and Dad have legal authority over the estate. They have power of attorney. The transaction's already been made." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What transaction?" "We found a buyer," my mother replied quickly, adjusting her silk collar like everything was already settled. "It's a great offer, above market value. The paperwork is signed. There's nothing more to discuss." I tightened my grip on the envelope in my hand. I hadn't opened it yet, because per instructions I had to wait until after the reading of the will. It had been sent by Grandma's lawyer, and she had written clearly, "Only open after everything has been said." "Get out of my grandmother's house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but the whole room seemed to freeze. "Don't be dramatic, Sophia." My father spoke for the first time, his voice dry. "We're still a family." I let out a hollow laugh that echoed through the heavy silence. Families don't do this to each other. They left the house one by one, but I could see relief in their eyes. My mother was the last to leave, but she paused at the doorway, turning back to say with a cryptic tone, "We're meeting the buyer tomorrow to hand over the keys. You should come. It'll be better for you to face reality." When the door closed, I stood there in complete silence. I sank into Grandma's favorite floral armchair and slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a carefully folded piece of paper and a small brass key. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then everything has happened just as I expected. But don't worry. I've left you something they don't know about. It will help you reclaim what's rightfully yours. Check beneath the third brick on the garden wall, the one with the carved sparrow. Love always finds its way, if you have enough faith." My heart pounded. Grandma always said, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to listen. It seemed she had prepared for every possibility, and now it was my turn to act. I stood up, still clutching the key. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting soft golden light across the house walls. This house hadn't finished telling its story, and I would be the one to listen to it until the very end. It was already dark when I stepped into the garden, holding a small flashlight and the brass key Grandma left me. The crisp, early-season air made me shiver, but my heart burned with determination. Each step on the mossy stone path took me back to childhood summers, watering plants with Grandma, picking up fallen petals, listening to her speak of the things grown-ups hide in places no one notices. I stopped at the old stone wall at the edge of the garden, the one where she used to sit quietly and embroider. Running my fingers over the bricks in the dim light, I searched for the carved sparrow. It took a few minutes, but at last, my fingers brushed against an oddly smooth curve, just as she'd written. A brick with a sparrow spreading its wings. I gently pried with my fingertip, and to my surprise, the brick came loose easily. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in vintage-patterned silk fabric. My heart pounded. I opened it to find a thick bundle of documents tied with a blue ribbon. a USB drive, and a handwritten note. My dear Sophie, they will try to take everything from you, but they don't know I was one step ahead. Inside these pages is the truth that the law cannot ignore. Take them to my lawyer, Abigail Hart. Trust no one else but her. Love you, Grandma Eleanor. Without hesitation, the next morning, I drove to Abigail's office, a small but elegant building in the heart of the city. Miss Hart was a woman in her early 40s, her brown hair neatly pinned back, and her sharp eyes looked like they could read every thought. When I placed the documents on her desk and explained everything, she stayed silent for a long moment, then began flipping through the first few pages. Less than 10 minutes later, her expression changed noticeably. Sophia, she said, her voice serious. Your grandmother was incredibly thorough. This document is a legally valid codicil to the original will. It was notarized 6 months before her passing. I straightened in my seat. Does it say anything specific? She nodded. A very clear clause. The house cannot be sold without your direct, signed consent, verified by a designated third party. Me. Even though your parents held power of attorney before, this clause was written to override any decision in case of a conflict of interest. I held my breath. But they said the deal was done. They gave me a copy of the sale agreement with my signature. Abigail silently flipped another page, then slid a photocopy of the contract across the desk to me. The signature at the bottom bore my name, but I instantly recognized that it wasn't my handwriting. The S was in that distinct swooping style my mother always used. I shivered. Can it be proven as forged? I asked, my voice dropping low. Absolutely, Abigail replied. If you have proof you weren't here on the date the papers were signed, this goes beyond an unauthorized sale. This is signature fraud, and the legal consequences are serious. I nodded, my hand tightening. I was in Denver that day. I have the plane ticket, hotel receipts, even social media check-in photos. I have everything. She gave a slight smile. Then we have the upper hand. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Mom knows what you're doing. Don't push yourself out of the family. I held the screen up to Abigail. She just smirked. A textbook move from someone who's scared. You should be prepared. When faced with the truth, some people react more extremely than you'd expect. We started making a plan immediately. Abigail would send a legal notice to the buyer to halt the property transfer and request a forensic analysis of the signature. I would gather all my proof of being out of town that day and keep Grandma's documents secret until Abigail confirmed my legal ownership. But I didn't expect that by late afternoon, when I returned to Grandma's house, I'd find the locks had been changed. On the oak door was a crudely taped note. No entry. Property now under buyer's management. I stood there, my hands clenched inside my coat pockets, while inside me, a quiet fire of resolve was beginning to burn. Did they really think a changed lock could erase everything Grandma left for me? I pulled out my phone and texted Abigail. They changed the locks, but I'm not backing down. Ready for the next step? I had never felt more certain this wasn't just about a house anymore. This was a wake-up call. That sometimes, the people closest to you are the very ones willing to erase you from their lives if it gains them something. And I, Sophia Bennett, wasn't going to let that happen. On Monday morning, I returned to Abigail Hart's office. She was already waiting, eyes sharp with determination, as if ready for a legal battle since sunrise. The buyer's name is Daniel Grayson, she said as I sat down. Real estate investor from Sacramento. He wired a deposit and plans to take possession of the house in 3 days. I frowned. Does he know I didn't sign the sale papers? Abigail shook her head. There's no indication he's aware, but we'll find out. I've arranged a meeting with him here this afternoon. You should be there too. At 2:30 p.m., Daniel walked in. Tall, polished, wearing a light blue shirt crisply pressed, with the calm confidence of someone used to being in control. But when his eyes met mine, that confidence wavered for a brief second. I'm guessing you're Sophia? He asked, taking a seat beside Ms. Hart. I nodded. My grandmother's house. The one you're trying to buy. Abigail opened the file and slid the sale contract in front of him. Mr. Grayson, this is the contract you signed with Sophia's family. But there's a serious issue. The signature representing the legal owner has been forged. Daniel furrowed his brow, his eyes scanning the signature. Is it hers? I spoke up. That signature isn't mine. And on the day the contract was signed, I was in Denver. I have solid proof. A moment of silence passed. Daniel looked me straight in the eye, then turned to Abigail. You're saying forged? They signed it for her? Not just forged, Abigail replied firmly. They violated a notarized codicil to the will. It clearly states that the house cannot be transferred without Sophia's direct consent, verified by me. This contract is entirely void. Daniel leaned back in his chair, clearly shocked. They told me you had agreed, that you were too busy to attend the signing. I gave a faint smile. They also told me the house was just a burden that no one wanted to keep. Daniel paused, his gaze slowly shifted into one of suspicion. I don't like being caught in the middle of lies. If this contract isn't valid, I want no part of it. Abigail gave a small smile. We're not asking you to proceed with the deal, but if you're willing to clarify what you were told by the sellers, it could be legally significant. He thought for a moment, then nodded. I've got nothing to hide. I'll cooperate, but you should know. Over the past few weeks, your mother kept pressuring me to sign quickly. She said there was a financial urgency, and if I delayed, she'd go with another buyer. I looked at Abigail. She was trying to rush everything before I found out. Daniel nodded, pulling out his phone. I've got the whole chain of emails and texts. I can print them and sign a statement if needed. Abigail jotted down notes in the file. We'll need everything, both content and timestamps, especially anything that mentions Sophia. Daniel picked up a folder he had brought. I also have this. There's a line where she says, "We are the rightful heirs. The girl won't be able to interfere. This deal is for the good of the whole family." I felt a tightness in my chest. A short sentence, but calculated and cold. To them, I was nothing more than an obstacle in their transaction. Daniel looked up, his gaze softening. I'm truly sorry. If I had known something was wrong, I wouldn't have gotten involved. I nodded. It's not your fault. You were just used, like I was. Abigail gathered the documents, arranging them neatly. Thank you, Daniel. Your testimony and evidence will be extremely helpful. He stood, shaking hands with us. If you need anything else, just reach out. I don't want to help anyone take something that doesn't belong to them. Once he left, the office fell silent again. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes still on the file on the desk. So they really went this far, I said slowly. Forging my signature, lying to the buyer, pushing me out of my own grandmother's house. Abigail looked at me, her expression resolute. And now it's time for you to take everything back. They didn't count on you fighting back. I pressed my lips together, then stood. I won't let my grandmother down. They think a few documents can erase everything, but they forgot one thing. Abigail raised an eyebrow. What? I turned to face her. That a true legacy doesn't lie in property. It lies in the truth. And I would be the one to bring that truth into the light. That evening, I got a call from someone I never expected to take my side. Vanessa. My sister, always the perfect replica of our mother, composed, polished, and forever defending our parents without question. But her voice on the phone didn't sound like the usual Vanessa. It was hesitant, uncertain. Sophia, can we meet? This is important. I was quiet for a few seconds, then asked, Where? Lantern Cafe, corner of 5th and Maple. Don't tell anyone in the family. 30 minutes later, I walked into the cafe with a swirl of mixed emotions, caution, anger, and a hint of curiosity. Vanessa was already seated in the corner, hands wrapped around a full coffee cup, her eyes fixed on the window as if avoiding reality. When she saw me, she stood quickly, pulling out a chair for me. I don't even know where to start, she said. her voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear. "Start with the truth," I replied coldly. Vanessa took a deep breath. "I went through some papers in Mom's drawer. There are things that don't match the will you and the lawyer have." I froze. "What do you mean?" "They altered documents. Mom has a fake version of the will. And there's a financial file too. Shady loans, questionable bills. Sophia, I think Dad's company is under investigation. They need money fast. That's why they tried to sell Grandma's house." It felt like the air froze in my lungs. I'd suspected it, but hearing it from my own sister was still a shock. "And the signature on the house sale contract?" Vanessa looked at me, guilty. "Brandon signed it. Mom convinced him. They said it was the only way to save the company from collapsing." I clenched both fists. They think forging legal documents is acceptable? Vanessa didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. "There's more," she continued. "They're planning to meet with a new buyer at the Regency Hotel next Friday night, 8 p.m. Room 746. They're trying to renegotiate, offering additional assets in the deal." I frowned. "What assets?" "I'm not sure, but Mom mentioned high-value items. I think it's the things Grandma kept hidden. Maybe paintings, jewelry, or something important you haven't discovered yet." I nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces clicking into place in my mind. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. Vanessa bit her lip. "Because I can't take it anymore. Mom's always wanted everything to go her way, ever since we were kids, but this time, they've gone too far. Grandma left that house to you, and I know she did it because she believed you were the only one who could protect it. I can't keep looking the other way." I looked at her. For the first time, I saw an unguarded honesty in her eyes. "Do you want help?" she asked quietly. I nodded, my voice firm. "Would you be willing to testify if this goes to court?" Vanessa hesitated for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Yeah." I pulled out my phone and texted Abigail. "New info. Secret meeting at Regency Hotel, room 706, 8 p.m. Friday. Bring recording equipment." Seconds later, the reply appeared. "Received. Ready. I'll meet you before the meeting." I looked up at Vanessa. "Thank you. Even if it's late, you made the right choice." She gave a soft, bittersweet smile. "Grandma once told me, choosing what's right late is better than never at all. Maybe it's time I finally listened to her." That Friday evening, Abigail and I arrived at the Regency Hotel right on time. On the 7th floor, we rented room 705, directly next to where the secret meeting would take place. Abigail installed the recording device into the wall outlet, and I pressed my ear against the thin wall, listening as if waiting for the truth to come pouring out. My mother's voice came first, cold and calculated. "We only have tonight. The auditors will go through the books on Monday. If the money isn't in the business account, they'll start digging." A man's voice followed, probably my father's. "We can't let everything fall apart because of that girl." My mother exhaled sharply. "Sophia won't know a thing. The buyer agreed to keep quiet if we turn over all of Eleanor's hidden valuables." I held my breath. "Valuables?" "Behind the built-in cabinet in the library," Mom continued. "Eleanor had a collection of pre-war artisan crafts, worth hundreds of thousands." I looked at Abigail. She had recorded the entire exchange, and her eyes flashed with satisfaction. "We've got what we need," she whispered. "Now we just bring it to light." I nodded, my heart pounding. My family had thrown away every moral line to hold on to something that no longer belonged to them. But they'd forgotten one thing. I was no longer the easily led little girl I used to be. I was the one Grandma trusted, and I wouldn't let her down. The voices from room 706 carried through the paper-thin wall. Each word cut through my memories of family like a blade. My mother spoke again, this time without her usual calm tone. "We can't let anyone discover the collection. If they trace the origin, it'll link back to all the old transactions. If Sophia finds them, everything falls apart. I turned to Abigail, her eyes lighting up again. She quickly scribbled notes, each stroke bold and deliberate. That collection. What is it really? I whispered. Abigail shook her head. We'll find out soon enough. On the other side of the wall, my father chimed in. Are you sure they're still in the house? Eleanor might have moved them somewhere else. No, my mother responded quickly. She didn't have the time, and she thought she could hide them longer. But I know that house better than anyone. The library room, the wall behind the bookshelf. There's a hidden compartment. We'll go there tomorrow morning before the auditors arrive. I heard footsteps, papers shuffling, then the sound of water being poured, followed by a new male voice, clearly the buyer's representative. But I need assurance. If those are truly antique paintings, their value is no less than $1 million. I won't transfer anything until they're verified. My mother spoke slowly. You'll get the paintings, but you are not to contact anyone connected to Sophia. She no longer has any rights. Abigail motioned with her hand, then pointed at the clock. Almost 8:30. She pulled out her phone and whispered, We've got enough on tape. We need to leave before they wrap up. We slipped out of the hotel through the back elevator, unnoticed. On the way back to the office, I didn't say a word. I just held tight to the bag containing the recording, evidence of a crime covered up for years by my own flesh and blood. Once we were back at the office, Abigail immediately extracted the audio file and saved it onto 3 separate devices. She wasn't taking any risks. Do you think my grandma knew about all this beforehand? I asked, curled up in a chair, eyes gazing out the nighttime window. Abigail nodded. Without a doubt. Eleanor didn't just revise her will. She deliberately added a clause to block the sale. That tells me she knew exactly what they were planning. I swallowed hard. And she hid the paintings inside the wall. Because if they were discovered, your entire family could face investigation for tax evasion, money laundering, or worse, trafficking undocumented artwork. Abigail opened a drawer and pulled out a list. Your grandmother had been in contact with an appraiser named Helen Reeves. This is a handwritten letter she wrote 6 months ago. It lists several paintings possibly belonging to a collection that's been missing since the 1940. I shivered. She knew what they were doing, and she tried to save everything in silence. Abigail looked at me for a long moment, then gave a small smile. And she believed you would be the one to protect that legacy when the time came. The next morning, we arrived at my grandmother's house with a court-issued authorization and a temporary protection order to prevent anyone from interfering with a property under legal dispute. The first person we saw was my brother Brandon, standing awkwardly at the front door, a set of keys fumbling in his hand. What are you doing here? I asked, stepping in front of him. Brandon froze, his eyes darting from Abigail back to me. Mom said she needed something checked in the library. I was just following instructions. And the forged signature on the sale contract? Were you just following instructions then too? I asked, my voice catching in my throat. Brandon bit his lip. I'm sorry, Soph. I know I messed up. But everything was falling apart. The company, the debts were piling up. Mom said if we didn't come up with the money, there'd be an investigation. And the solution was selling off Grandma's last memory? I shook my head. You had a choice, and you picked the wrong side. Abigail stepped forward, holding out the court order. From this moment on, all activity on this property requires written approval from Sophia. Any attempt to enter, remove, or alter anything inside is a legal offense. Brandon lowered his head and handed over the keys. I took them and stepped into the house with a strange feeling. The soft scent of lavender was still there, Grandma's portrait still hung in the center of the room, but this time, I wasn't walking in as her granddaughter. I was walking in as the keeper of the truth. We headed straight for the library, where the walls were lined with antique books and muted sunlight filtered through the windows. I ran my hand along the wooden trim behind the third bookshelf, the spot my mother mentioned during the meeting. A soft click echoed. A small compartment opened behind the paneling. Abigail shone a flashlight inside. There were 4 rolled-up paintings in protective tubes, a wooden box engraved with Eleanor B., and a sealed envelope with a red wax stamp. I picked up the envelope, my fingers trembling. On the front, in my grandmother's handwriting, were the words, "For Sophia, when you're ready to face the truth." I opened it. Inside was a single note, written in her familiar script. It's not the paintings, but the story behind them that must be protected. And the truth, no matter how long it's buried, will always find the light. I looked up, my throat tight with emotion. Abigail smiled. "We're going to bring that truth into the light." And I knew this was only the beginning. 3 days later, we submitted all the evidence we had gathered to the Portland City Police. Abigail personally presented the audio recording of the meeting, a copy of the forged contract, and the list of valuable paintings my grandmother had hidden. Works suspected to be linked to an illegal art trafficking network dating back to the 1990s. The lead investigator, Mr. Gregory Hale, was calm but had eyes that missed nothing. After reviewing the file and listening to the entire recording, he simply said, "There's enough here to open a criminal investigation, and if the paintings match this list, this won't just be a civil matter." That very evening, he requested we accompany him to the Arlington Hotel, where my parents were scheduled to meet the buyer for the transfer of additional assets, the hidden art collection. Abigail concealed a recording device in her coat pocket, and I had my phone already set to video mode. Vanessa came with us, clutching a folder of documents she had quietly copied from our mother's office. She was the first in our family to break the silence, and now she wanted to see it through. We stepped into the meeting room on the 14th floor just as my mother was pulling a fabric-wrapped painting from a suitcase. The unfamiliar man standing across from her, likely the collector, reached out to touch the frame but froze the moment he saw us. My mother turned around, her face going pale the instant she spotted me, Abigail, and Vanessa entering. "What is this?" she asked, voice calm but her hand tightening around her bag strap. "This," I said, raising my phone, "is the truth, and this time it's not staying hidden." My father stepped forward, trying to block me. "Sophia, you're walking into trouble. This isn't what you think." "Isn't what I think," I scoffed, then turned to the buyer. "Did you know the pieces you're planning to buy are listed as missing since 1948, according to records from the National Art Crime Database?" The man jerked his hand back. "Excuse me?" Abigail pulled out a letter of authentication from expert Helen Reeves. "The painting you're holding is one of several reported missing from the private collection of a Jewish family in France. If you accept it, you could be prosecuted for participating in an illicit transaction." Just then, police burst into the room. Inspector Hale led the team, instructing everyone to stay put, and immediately began seizing all paintings, documents, and related devices. My parents were stunned, while Vanessa stood beside me, her gaze fixed on our mother. "I used to think you did this for the family, but I was wrong. You were only trying to save your own power." My mother met her eldest daughter's eyes, her voice hardening. "I did everything for you." "No," I cut in. "You did everything to hide the truth, that this family was built on things no one dared to talk about. But today, that ends." My father dropped his hands and slowly sank into a chair, as if all strength had drained from him. "Your mother didn't lie," he whispered. "We made mistakes, but it was to protect the company, our name." Inspector Hale interrupted. "Mr. Bennett, we have evidence that your company used fake invoices, shipped counterfeit art to Europe, and received authentic works through furniture import routes. This is organized money laundering, and doing it for the family doesn't exempt you from the law." Suddenly, the doors swung open. Brandon, my brother, entered with a tense expression. He looked at no one but me. "Sophia," he said, I'm here to make a statement. Mom and Dad didn't act alone. There are other partners involved. I have documents." Abigail stepped forward to collect the stack of papers from him. I looked at Brandon, the same person who once forged my signature, and asked quietly, Why the change of heart? He sighed. Because I don't want to keep pretending. Everything Grandma did, she did for us. And me, I only ever listened to Mom. But now, I realize that silence is a form of complicity too. Inspector Hale accepted his statement and asked Brandon to stay for a full report. The art buyer left the room shortly after, leaving behind all documents and confirming his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. As police began collecting evidence, I walked over to my mother. She was still standing, arms crossed, her eyes not angry, just tired. "Why you?" she asked softly. I looked her in the eye. Because Grandma trusted me. Because I never saw that house as a possession. I saw it as memory. As the last proof of honesty in a family that got too comfortable hiding things. She didn't say another word. Abigail signaled for me to head out as officers began sealing the art crates. Vanessa gave my hand a light squeeze as we exited the hotel, and Brandon followed silently behind, his eyes fixed on the first signs of everything crumbling. But inside, I knew. This wasn't collapse, it was awakening, and I wasn't going to let it be silenced again. 2 months after the Arlington Hotel raid, my life changed completely. My parents, Carol and Griffin Bennett, were sentenced to 6 and 8 years in prison, respectively, after agreeing to cooperate with authorities and expose the full scope of the illegal art dealings they'd been part of. Under the direction of federal investigators, more than 10 others were arrested, including 3 major business partners of my family's furniture company, individuals who had used wooden shipping containers as a front to smuggle art across borders for nearly a decade. Bennett & Co., once my father's pride, was now officially dissolved. The remaining legal assets after liquidation, including factories, trucks, and commercial properties, were redistributed by the court, with the majority returned to the estate of my grandmother, Eleanor Bennett. I was formally declared the sole heir to her entire personal estate, including the old house and the art collection, which had been appraised at over $3,400,000 by the insurance agency. I stood in the living room as the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the patterned glass windows, casting reflections on the freshly painted white walls. Vanessa was dusting the bookshelf, and Brandon was closing up the old wooden chest he had once planned to hide the paintings in. In the midst of all the loss, the 3 of us, who once had nothing left to hold us together, had rediscovered what my grandmother had spent her life protecting. Family isn't built on possessions, but on truth. "I fixed the kitchen door," Brandon said as he passed me, his voice much softer than before. I nodded with a smile. "Thanks. This house feels like it's been waiting for that." Vanessa stood upright, her hand resting on an old book embroidered with our grandmother's name. "She left us more than we realized." I nodded. "Not just paintings or property. She left us a chance to start over, this time with no more secrets." Every day in this house helped me understand why she kept everything here. Beneath the old tile floors were the footprints of our childhood. Above, on the ceiling, still remained the faint crack she once said, "Look like a heart if you stand at just the right angle." And in every photo frame, every book, were traces of a woman who lived ahead of her time, quietly fighting to protect values more lasting than wealth. On Friday afternoon, lawyer Abigail stopped by with the final court confirmation. The house, all its contents, and the insurance settlement from the paintings were now legally mine. She placed the file on the coffee table, the same spot where my grandmother used to sit every afternoon, brewing tea and knitting handkerchiefs. "Congratulations, Sophia," Abigail said gently. "You kept your promise to her." I opened the file, scanning the red seals and signatures. No more disputes, no more forgeries, no more fearing tomorrow. I don't know what to say except, "Thank you," I replied, my heart light as if a boulder had been lifted from my chest. "There's one more thing you should know," she said, pulling out a small envelope. "This came from the archives, your grandmother's last letter, dated 1 week before she passed." I took the envelope and opened it. Her familiar handwriting appeared on cream stationery. "My dearest Sophie, If you're reading this, then the secrets have likely come to light. I never wanted you to grow up with a heart full of doubt, but sometimes the truth needs time to rise. Keep this house as a place of healing, not just for you, but for all who've ever lost their way. I love you, Grandma. I folded the letter, my eyes stinging, but my heart strangely at peace. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Edward, the former art buyer, now an unexpected ally through the entire ordeal. "Hi, Sophia," he smiled, holding a carefully wrapped frame. "I stopped by to return this. I think it belonged to your grandmother." I unwrapped the package. It was the small watercolor painting she had hung in her bedroom, a spring garden scene. I'd always assumed it was a print, but now, looking closely, each brushstroke was clear. This was the original. Edward spoke gently. I had it appraised. Turns out it was the debut piece of a well-known female artist from the 1920s. No signature, because your grandmother was her close friend. I laughed softly. She hid talent better than she hid old paintings. We hung the painting back in its original place, right above the fireplace. The house felt alive again. This time, without lies, only love, memories, and a new beginning. As the orange glow of sunset filtered through the windows, I stood on the porch with Vanessa and Brandon, 3 fractured pieces slowly stitching back together with the invisible thread of forgiveness. "Grandma was right," I said quietly. "We can lose everything, but as long as we still have trust, we can rebuild." Vanessa squeezed my hand. Brandon gave a small nod. This house had once buried secrets. Now it held the most precious things of all: truth, love, and family. Just as Eleanor always hoped. From my own story, I've come to realize that the most valuable legacy isn't money or rare paintings. It's truth and the courage to protect what's right. Even when betrayed by those closest to me, I chose to stand up, not for revenge, but to preserve the values my grandmother cherished all her life. In the end, the house wasn't just protected. It became a place of healing, of new beginnings, and of proof that truth always finds its voice. What do you think about Sophia's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and meaningful stories about life and family.